Welcome. I'm Melva Persico. Come with me, meet new people, and share their experiences as we take our culture to the world. And our guest today is Barbara Atherly. Barbara, please tell us about yourself. Introduce yourself to the guests, please.
Hi, I'm Barbara Atherly, and I was born in Guyana, South America. Not Ghana, Guyana, South America. I am number 9 of 10 children, and I grew up in the capital city of Georgetown. I received my primary, tertiary education in Guyana, and my master's degree from the University of the West Indies, Mona, Kingston. Growing up as a child, I always liked to deal with the humanities, trying to understand human beings and how they work, how they interact within society, how the social, cultural, economic, and political dynamics impact the way we live as human beings. As a result, I focused on education and the social sciences for my studies. I'm a trained teacher by profession and have been working over the last 30 odd years in the field of education and social sciences. I lectured at the University of Guyana and the Guyana Management Institute on management issues and social sciences, looking at the Caribbean social structure. For the past 20 years or more, I have been employed with the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, in the field of education and emergencies. As a result of my tenure with UNICEF, I worked extensively in Guyana, working in all regions in Guyana, the Caribbean, and Latin America. My first international posting was to Afghanistan. Since then, I've worked in several other countries, including Nepal, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Mozambique, and Syria. So I bring to you today some of my experiences, particularly from my first international posting and the cultural and social aspects that have made an impact on my life.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much and welcome, Barbara. Yes, you have indeed traveled extensively. You have lived and worked in places that we only hear about on the news, and some of us could only dream about wanting to visit. I just wanted to share quickly. This is you from Guyana, and you said your first posting was to Afghanistan. So there you are going from Georgetown to Guyana to Afghanistan. And as you mentioned, you're going to share your experiences in your travel, your life in different places, but mostly in Afghanistan. And seeing that this was the first international posting for you, going from Guyana way across the world to Afghanistan, what were your first impressions, or even was there any kind of culture shock experience that you had when you went to Afghanistan for the first time?
Most definitely. Most definitely. I should mention that I left Guyana via New York. I went to New York where I was briefed. And even before then, when persons heard that I was going to work in Afghanistan in 2002, everyone was taken aback. And they were very concerned about my safety and my well-being. And many tried to deter me from going on this assignment. However, I was determined, and knowing me, I like challenges, as well as I like to see new places and to experience the different cultures. I did that in my own country and thought that I had a very good understanding and appreciation of what Guyana was like. However, having left New York, I traveled to Dubai. And that in itself was another eye-opener for me because Dubai was so well developed and it was the airport, etc., was really magnificent. I was taken by a United Nations aircraft because we are not allowed to fly on commercial airlines. I was taken via the UN aircraft and we flew to Kabul. Now imagine I left Guyana, right? What we say is an undeveloped country. And I went to Kabul. And my first impression when I got there, that yes, I am definitely in a war-torn country. Because the first things that struck me when I left the airport, and I will come back to while I was in the airport, while on the way to where we stayed, we call them guest houses. On the way to the guest house, I saw the impact of the war on the infrastructure of Kabul. There were lots of bombed out buildings, vehicles at the side of the road that were bombed out, and the large or huge craters on the road. I will show you that in a minute. But just to say, while in the airport itself, it dawned on me that I was the only female in the environment there that was unaccompanied by any male person. And that quickly, right, brought the reality to me about what you hear about a culture is another thing to actually experience it. Right? The other thing that struck me, there were lots of soldiers en route to the guest house at checkpoints. In the airport, there were lots of soldiers as well. I'm coming from a military background because my husband was in the army, but I've never seen that presence with all the equipment and guns, etc., before. And that in itself, right, caused me to check carefully as to where I was. Let me take you to the point and share my screen and show you what I saw when I arrived in Afghanistan.
Sure, go ahead. Okay, wow. So this is some of what you were talking about, the craters and the buildings destroyed, vehicles destroyed. Wow. Yeah.
Right. So here, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear.
Yeah. Yes, so here you see the buildings and the vehicles, and what you've seen here on the road was a lot. Many other areas you would find spots like this as you journeyed along the way. So this is one. I'm going to get back to the other screen in a bit, but imagine arriving and this is the first thing that you see in a country.
Nice. Okay.
Good. So apart from that, what I found was that, and something that struck me is the way the people in Afghanistan dress. You heard a lot, the women are always well covered, etc. But the burqa that they wore, this blue-gray burqa, really took me back a bit just to see all the women uniformly dressed in that manner. And the men were attired in what they call the Perhan Tuban, something like that. But that's a loose shirt that they wear with baggy pants. And I'm going to share my screen and share that with you as well to understand the environment in which I was coming from, a Western environment dressed in normal clothes. But because I was briefed, I had on appropriate clothes, but still not quite suitable for the environment to which I was entering into.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And most of them would wear, especially if they're going to work or so, they would wear this best coat over their clothing. And the colors, either this blue gray or black, or there's a kind of cakey brownish one that they use from time to time.
Okay.
So this is what it's like.
Yes.
The women, on the other hand, this is how you would see them walking around. And you would notice here that there is a young boy with them. Good. You always see them there. Always, if they're women alone, which is hardly ever seen, there, or you see them, clustered together like this, or they are accompanied by a male. Could be a young child, right, or an adult male. The male that they call the maharam. And I'll tell you a story about Maharam a little later as I go along.
I just wanted to ask you, because you said you were dressed appropriately, but maybe not, because you were briefed. I just wanted to find out, how were you dressed? I mean, you said you were dressed, but maybe not exactly the way you should have been. How were you dressed when you arrived?
Okay, I had my head covered with a scarf. I had on long sleeve shirt. Right, and full and loose pants, loose trousers.
Okay.
And I will show you later on how I normally dress. I was not, because I was a foreigner, I was not asked to wear the burqa.
Okay.
Right, but many, all my female colleagues who were Afghani, they wore the burqa. The officer, he could pick them up from home. They came in the burqa, but when they got into the office, they took it off. But their hair was always covered, and they always wore the right attire in terms of clothing.
Okay, interesting. Yes, very good. Yes, so so I can imagine, it was quite a shock. You said you were brief, but still, it was very, 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 very different experience for you. And how was it though? Were you able to adapt in any way to this strange society, this strange culture that you were in?
Okay, apart from what I told you earlier, there were other things that really, really stuck out to me. I knew that as a woman, I shouldn't shake a man's hand. But when I got there on the ground, I saw the way they greeted each other, especially the men. Got it? We, in our society, men shook hands, right? It's only now that you see some of them patting each other on the shoulder and gripping and embrace. But there, you found that the men hugged and they kissed one next cheek, next cheek. They always greeted each other like that. The women, on the other hand, they never extend their hand to men. They may put their hands here and give a slight bow, and that was it. When the women, when they are together and they greet each other, we did with a hug and a kiss. But once a man is around, they would never ever embrace you or kiss you. I went to a function once and I couldn't understand why this woman, who was always giving me a hug when we met, when she came to my office or anything, was not greeting me the way she normally did. And then my staff had to explain to me, no, they were men around, so we should not embrace or show emotions to each other. So, there were lots of things that really stuck out. The other one was a complete separation of women and men. Like I said, the women were always accompanied in public by a male. The women are not allowed to move around on their own in public. But when you got to functions or anything else, there was always that separation of the gender. The males separate from the females, and often with some physical barrier, whether it's a curtain or a separate room, there was always that separation. And, working in the office itself, we always had to make sure that like two women are in an office space, and there is where I really learned to work with my door open because if a male comes into you, it's very on not just unprofessional, but unethical for a male and a female to be in a close environment together if it's not your husband. And so my door was always open because I had male staff as well. And so remove any doubts of any kind, you always make sure that your doors were open and that the women were also protected. But when it came to lunchtime, I like my sports. I like to discuss things with both gender, male and female. I was not allowed to sit with the men and eat. The women huddled in one area, the men in another area, and that is how we ate. So those are some of the things that really jumped out that, brought about changes in the way I work with colleagues and even trying to adapt to the way that they are used to.
Yes. And as you said, I mean, you had to adapt to, you were forced to, because there was no other way really for you to go about your work and to interact with people. Was there anything else you wanted to add about ways in which you were able to adapt to that culture?
Yeah, I always felt comfortable because I'm a Guyanese. And Guyana is a multi-ethnic and multi-religious society. So you had a glimpse and an understanding of each other's culture and each other's religion. However, right, going to a country where everyone in the country is practicing the same religion, right, is really powerful and had an impact on me. I ended up living in Herat in a guest house where I was the only female and I was the only Christian. So everyone around me, at like on Friday prayer time, or when it's, called to prayer, which was a public announcement with megaphones and loudspeakers, right? I knew that I came up from a country where we have Muslims, but it was never that forceful or constantly in, there with you, or it wasn't you constantly, you are aware that you are in a Muslim society. So you found yourself, right, very often, everyone would disappear from you, right, and they're gone to prayer. And Friday, I'm alone in the guest house because the men have gone to the mosque, right? Because I only have men. So I try to adapt and I try to find ways of doing things. So Friday, I sort of designated for my own personal beautification and my own time to meditate and, read the word of God and get into my own spiritual realm. So that was one way I had to cope with that. Another was, my first meeting with the government officials that I arranged. I had persons coming from the different provinces, Gore, Baghdad, Bagdish, Farah, and Herat itself. And I had everything prepared. I know what I wanted to say, but when I walked into the room, it was just a sea of men. And as a woman, I felt intimidated to some extent. I remember stepping back and closing the door and trying to figure in my mind, how would I be able to relate to these men? But there's nothing like being prepared. So I plucked up the courage and I went in, and I think my time with them went very well and they respected me for the work that I did with them. But you really had, and I asked them a lot about their own culture, their own life during the meeting as an icebreaker so that they would see that I'm trying to understand them and to share, where I came from with them. So those are some of the things that I tried to do to adapt to what they did. One of the things that I was very proud of that I did, it was the month of Ramadan, the period of fasting.
Yes.
And my colleagues were there sitting, we were at the table, and they were planning how they cook. And I must say, our cooks were always males. How the cook was going to prepare the meals so that I can have, breakfast and lunch. And I promptly stopped them and I said, no, it's Ramadan. You're fasting and I'm fasting. They said, no, it will be very difficult. I said, no, whatever we do in this guest house, we do together. So I observed Ramadan to the fullest extent with my colleagues. So every time I went to a meeting with the government officials, they would always say, we apologize because we can't serve you tea, because everywhere you go, they serve you tea. And my staff would tell them, no, she's observing Ramadan with us. And that really, really opened the way and paved the way for me to have an excellent relationship with the government officials. Some of them invited me home for iftar and things like that. So in a sense, trying to adapt to others' culture, I did it, but I didn't become of it.
Right. Yes.
And if you look,
you didn't convert.
But no, I didn't convert, but just to make things and life simpler and to show that I don't want to be eaten, right, while they are not. And, I did it. And it helped me in my own religious beliefs as a Christian. And because I never observed Lent in a very strict way. Haven't done Ramadan once. After then, until now, I can do my Lent in a strict way that I pray to God about, and He directs me as to what I should do.
And I'm sure they, they appreciated the fact that they probably saw it as a way of your showing respect for their culture, the way, you acted in that particular situation. But tell me, as we move along, were there any stereotypes about the people in Afghanistan and their culture that you were able to dispel, while you were there, having lived there?
I think one of the general belief is that the Afghans are very hostile and aggressive, warlike people. And, they've been fighting for 40 years plus. Okay? And that is because, they were, at one stage, they were invaded. Then they had to fight against the different factions that they have in the country, whether it's the Talibans or the jihadists, the Al-Qaeda, right? They had, they had to preserve themselves or preserve their beliefs. But when you actually meet them and you are interacting with them, they're actually very hospitable people. And in fact, hospitality is one of the hallmarks of the Afghans. Regardless of who you are, regardless of where you're from, they're always welcoming. And you would never go to a home and they don't offer you whatever they have, right? And for them, that's the best they have to offer, but they would do it. I recall doing National Immunization Days campaigns. And those campaigns, we had to monitor them out in the community, especially in the rural areas, to make sure that persons were vaccinated, the children were vaccinated, whether it's the children or the women. And what struck me is that every home you stopped at, they offered you something to eat or drink. After about the third or fourth home, you know what's happening with you because you have to take the tea. And the staff will tell you, at least, Barbara Jan, just take some tea, please just take a little tea. But you have to learn the secret that once you empty the cup with the tea, it will quickly be refilled.
Yes.
Right. So you have to know to sip and leave so that they wouldn't come back with more. But because then your glass should never, your cup should never be empty in the culture. So they keep refilling. So that is one thing that struck me with them. Because if you know, historically, they have been a peaceful people. Even during the World War II, they were very neutral. They weren't involved in the wars, and they weren't attacked, and they did not join in the war. But because of the circumstances, they find themselves having to defend themselves, whether it's from internally or external forces. Another one is another myth that I found that had to be dispelled was the educational level of the Afghans. Many people think that they are backward and that they're, especially the women, are uneducated. That's not so. I met the smartest and the brightest. Most of them that I encountered spoke English, and the smallest child is trying to learn English. And they see that as a way of not just motivating them, but inspiring them to move on to higher heights. Once they know the English language, you can manage a computer, they're doing different things. And they place a high premium on education. So even although the Taliban had a serious grip on not allowing girls to be educated, there's a lot of homeschool-based types of school or education. Even in my program, I had done a community-based school training for teachers to train children in their community to be able to access education without having to travel distances or to be threatened by males or anything. So they place a high premium on education, and I think that that's a positive for them as well.
Because even though, we see in the news now, we know what's happening right now with the U.S. The U.S. and allied forces pulling out, and they show you how much progress has been made with the schooling, especially of women and girls. And I guess they're fearing that there's going to be a reversal of that. But as you said, even in those situations, they were very quietly in their own little, we have homeschooling situations, so that is a positive.
Yes, that I recall when I was setting up the community-based schools, I recall organizing the training of trainers workshop for the teachers, and this is to promote girls' education. And when we arrived at the venue, and I saw the room was just filled with men. So I mentioned to the director that, if we train them, this would not have an impact on girls' education because of their cultural beliefs and their way of dealing with girls. Because after a while, the men will not be able to interact or interface with the girls. So what we needed were women to be trained. And I even had, and so they were saying, but where are we going to find women from? I said, and they said, I said, no, we're going to find women. If we go to the transit center where they're coming back from Iran, we can find them. And what we need to do is just to train them and guide them on working with girls in the education arena. So we had to suspend the workshop for a while and then have them work on finding women to do that program. And I think that was one of the hallmarks of my time in Afghanistan, because towards the end, most of the training workshops had predominantly women as against men.
That's good, very good. Congratulations. But tell me something, Guyana. You know, as you said right up at the beginning, when started, many people, when they hear Guyana, they think Ghana. But in Afghanistan, do the people there know anything about Guyana?